It's Tuesday. We're going to carry on with the fish, the osteichthyes, osteocytes. For those that took anatomy, osteocyte is a bone cell. The cells are in the bone. Anyway, the extant species of bony fish is what they look like. One of the things the bony fish have that the cartilaginous fish didn't have is a swim bladder. The swim bladder is able to fill with air either through a gas gland from their bloodstream, or sometimes some of the fish can actually gulp air in. This will allow the fish to stay at one depth without having to keep swimming like the cartilaginous fish have to do. They have to keep swimming in order to stay at one level. But there's the parts of the fish that you're not going to get to dissect now. Oh, another year with those fish in the drawer. What am I going to do? Because I always put beautiful reef fish out, I thought I'd show you some Great Lake fish. The colors aren't there, but they're pretty cool looking things. Lake trout, whitefish, sturgeon, walleye, rainbow brown trout, alewife, smelt, ruffle. So if you ever go to the Great Lakes and go fishing, you might catch some of them. Or not. Bluegill, yellow perch, and we have some of them around here. Some ray fin fish. There's two types of fish. There's ray fin, spiny ray fish, and you'll see this here. Some are simply strange. There's a mahi-mahi, a dolphin fish. Not a dolphin, a dolphin fish. The shape of the fish shows it's a predator, fast swimming. It's a streamlined shape to allow it to swim really fast. There's a unicorn fish. There's puffer fish. Puffer fish, they can suck in air. They put the air into their gut, and what they'll do is they can blow themselves up to make them look a lot bigger than they really are. These large marlin and sailfish type of fish, these billfish, there's about 8 species of these around the Gulf of Mexico, and it'd be nice to catch one of them. Here's some examples of maneuverable telecasts. These guys can maneuver around. They can bend and twist and turn, go in between the weeds, go in between the rocks and the crevices of the coral reefs, and so on. This is called a mola mola. Ever hear of that one? This is a sunfish. It looks like his tail got cut off, but it didn't. And of course, you've got these guys, which we're not really supposed to have in the water around here, but we do. They make it all the way up the coast. And my favorite, the coelacanth. The coelacanth was caught off of East London, where I ended up living for 11 years, by my first class that I taught. One of the students in the class, his uncle caught this in 1939. This fish freaked everybody out. This was a fish that they had fossils of that were 60 million years old, and they caught a live one of these things. And they're called lobed fin fishes. Now, most of the fish, their fins are just coming out. There's nothing special. But these have some muscles on the fins. They almost make it look like they could walk on the bottom along the rocks using the fins like legs. And that's why they got called lobed fin fish. They are the ancestors to the other, not to the other fish, but they're the ancestors to probably the amphibians. Ray fin fish and lobed fish belong to a clade of gnathostomes called osteichthyes. Nearly all living osteichthyans have a bony exoskeleton, not cartilaginous, bony. All are vertebrates, which we call fish. All control their buoyancy with an air sac known as a swim bladder. Fish breathe by drawing water in from 4 or 5 pairs of gills located in the chambers covered by a protective body flap called an operculum. This is the bony operculum that they have over their gill chambers. The sharks did not have that, okay? They just have skin there and openings you can see. The water goes into the mouth, the floor of the mouth drops, the water goes in, the gill slits are closed. The mouth closes, the floor of the mouth lifts up again and pushes the water that's in there over the gills. The gill slits open and you have water flowing over the gills all the time. And that's how they get their oxygen. The gills are right behind the mouth. Actinorhynchi are the ray fin fish, include nearly all familiar aquatic osteichthyans. things like the tuna, the clownfish, the seahorse, the moray eel. These fins, supported mainly by long, flexible rays, are modified for maneuvering, defense, and other functions. Yeah, some of these fins that they have, not only are they helpful for maneuvering, but they may contain poison, which they'll stick you with. The lobed fin, as I told you, have muscular and pectoral fins, including the coelacanths, lungfish, and tetrapods. There's the lungfish that actually have lungs and a separate pulmonary system, so they can either breathe with gills or breathe with lungs. They'll come up and take a breath. The tetrapods are gnathosomes that have limbs and feet. Most of the significant events in vertebrate history was when the fins of some lobe-finned fish evolved into limbs of feet of tetrapods. Tetrapods have specific adaptations, forelimbs and feet with digits, ears for detecting airborne sounds, desiccation in wet. It's always wet in water and dry on land, so water is lost through the skin and the respiratory surfaces and from the eggs, so they have to adapt to that. It's starting to sound like the plants, isn't it? Support. Air is not as dense as water, so it does not provide support. Not only is support required, but means for active locomotion on land is also required. Sensation. Air doesn't transmit sound as well as water. Water is about 3 times faster than air, but vision might work better over long distances. Temperature. The air warms up and cools down much faster than water does. Low temperature on land can inhibit their activity. So why come ashore? Good question. Ask them. One lineage of lobe fins, the fish became progressively more limb-like while the rest of the body retained their adaptations of aquatic life. Maybe they weren't sure they wanted to come ashore. But then something chased them, they came ashore. That's probably the best example of that. They got away from predators, they came up onto land, and what was there? A whole bunch of things, but no predators for them. Extraordinary fossil discoveries over the last 20 years allowed paleontologists to reconstruct the origin of tetrapods. And here it is here. Here's your coelacanth and your lungfish, giving rise to these guys with feet, which gives rise to the amphibians. And, of course, the amniotes, the reptiles. Maybe this was one of the great moments in evolution. Why did they come out of the water? Well, they had to go get their ball, I guess. I don't know. Always liked that picture. Sorry. Class Amphibia, represented by about 4,800 species of organisms. Most amphibians have moist skin that complements the lungs and gas exchange, so they can absorb oxygen through their skin and through their lungs and through the tissues in their mouth that used to be their gills when they were larvae. This includes salamanders, which have tails, or Urodela, Anura, which are the frogs and toads, which lack tails, the Caecilians, which are legless and resemble worms. Amphibian means 2 lives. It's a reference to the metamorphosis of aquatic larvae into terrestrial adults. The tadpole is the aquatic herbivore with a fish-like tail and internal gills. During metamorphosis, the gills and tails are reabsorbed and walking legs develop. Here's some amphibians, extinct ones. I wish he was still alive. I always liked that one with the cool head. Amphibians represent the first truly tetrapod vertebrates, first to move about and support themselves on land. All amphibians have bony skeletons. Most have 4 limbs except the Caecilians. And many have webbed feet. Typically, the glandular skin is smooth, moist, and lacks scales. Caecilians have concealed dermal scales. One advance associated with more terrestrial existence is the refinement of the ear. The amphibian ear, unlike those of fish, consists of 3 components: the inner, middle, and outer ear. There is an increased sensitivity to accommodate airborne sounds, so when they came out, they had to be able to hear what was going on. Gas exchange occurs through the lungs, gills, and or the skin. Some salamanders have no lungs. Adults have double circulation, both pulmonary and systemic circulation. The heart has 3 chambers, 2 aorta and 1 ventricle, so the blood comes into the heart and goes to the ventricle and goes out through the lungs and gills, back to the other aorta, back to the ventricle, and out to the whole body. So you always have mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood in there. Is that efficient? No, because we actually have two ventricles to stop that from happening. The evolution of the tetrapod limb was the third major hallmark in vertebrate evolution. In early forms, the limbs represented the scarpa origini, pectoral and pelvic fins. Where'd it go here? There it is there. So there's the body and there's the fins. Development of the limbs required only a few minor modifications: elongation of the elements into long bones and limbs, proliferation of more distal elements into bones of feet, elaboration of pectoral and pelvic girdles. Early locomotion was probably very crude. Orientation of limbs did not effectively allow the body to be raised above the substrate. The limbs acted as pivot points rather than propulsion. Most salamanders still move about in that particular way. Emergence onto land required adaptations to accommodate desiccation. Amphibians have the external layer of skin, the substratum corneum, that consists of a single layer of dead cornified cells which reduced water loss to the skin to some extent. Not as good as scales would, but to some extent. However, amphibian eggs would still dry out, so amphibians are reproductively dependent on water. So they have to lay their eggs in water, or the eggs will dry, or a moist environment, or the eggs will dry out and you won't get any babies. Fertilization is external. Most salamanders have external fertilization. Males deposit the spermatophore, which is picked up by the female and put into the spermatheca, the wall of the cloaca. The eggs are fertilized as they pass through the cloaca where the sperm is sitting. Most amphibians are oviparous. Females lay eggs. Some amphibians undergo direct development in the egg. The embryos bypass the larva stage and they occur as miniature versions of the adults. In most amphibians, the young usually goes through some type of larva stage. A few forms, the adults will retain larva characteristics called neoteny. Very few forms are viviparous. Some females retain their eggs in their body until they're ready to hatch. It's clear that amphibians evolved from some lineage of the fish. However, the details still remains obscure. One fossil group from the Crostopterygidae lineage provided that a good candidate for the amphibian origins were the Rhapsidians, shared many characteristics with fossil amphibians: the lobe fin structure, the jaw structure, and the type of teeth. Some mitochondrial DNA evidence, recent stuff, has shown that amphibians are more similar to lungfish than to the coelacanths, suggesting a different origin for amphibians. So they're not really sure about that. Something they can argue about all the time. Everybody argues, especially when they change the books. Although the actual origins are uncertain, it's clear that there was plenty of selective pressure for amphibians to emerge. Wet and dry spells would have set up intense competition in the aquatic habitats, would favor the ability to move from one pond to another. Oxygen poor waters would favor air breathing. So there's the reason. Also, there was a lot of different arthropods there, things for them to eat. Centipedes, millipedes, spiders, insects would create an open niche for a low competition terrestrial environment. Lastly, the ability to temporarily move out of the water would allow early amphibians a means of escaping from aquatic predators. Aren't they cute? The fossil record of amphibians include two extinct subclasses. The earliest fossil amphibians belong to Labyrinthodonta. There they are again. Where's my favorite one? No, it's not there. 5 feet long. Okay. Oh, there it is. There's my favorite one. There it is there. Living amphibians. First true frog, 190 million years ago. First salamander, 145 million years ago. First Caecilians, 195 million years ago. So about 200 million years of amphibians. Because many forms have delicate skeletons, they don't preserve very well. What's this?
At the bottom of the ocean dwells a bizarre-looking creature. A fish so ancient it has remained unchanged for 300 million years.
I'm going to stop that because it's probably copyrighted and I can't put it on there now. YouTube will crunch it. Anyway, the last parts, amniotes are pteropods that have terrestrial adapted eggs. Amniotes are a group of tetrapods whose living members are the reptiles, including the birds and the mammals. Okay, so that's it for today. Have a great day.